In today's video, you're going to learn everything you need to know regarding lists and keys within React. So let's first say that you have a list of data within your program. So here on line 5, I create a constant and I assign this constant called programming languages to a list. And each item in this list contains an object. And the object has a language and a devs property, in which the language property points to the name of a programming language and the devs property points to some number. These are definitely not accurate numbers representing how many devs there are for JavaScript. I literally just banged on my keyboard for a little bit for the sake of having some dummy data. So we have this list of data here, and let's also say that we have a component that will use this list of data. So I have a component called programming language that takes two props here, language and developers. And it's going to return just some HTML that tells you what the programming language name is and how many developers there are. And let's also say that we want to render this programming language component for each item in this list. Well, how would we solve this problem within React? Well, luckily, React gives us a fairly straightforward way of doing this. So in order to do this, there's kind of a couple of different approaches that you could take. Let's first talk about the kind of first option you could take, in which you could assign a list to some element and then render that element out within your component. So what I'm going to do here, so I have my main overall app component. And within this app component, I'm going to render a list of these programming language components using this data here. So what you can do here is you can actually map over your list and you can return a new component for each item within the list. So on my list here, I'm calling the .map method. I'm taking my programming language data here, which is going to be an object with the language and the devs. And then all I need to do is return from this map method a new component for each item in my list. And this doesn't necessarily have to be a component. You could just render out some basic JSX here and it would still work. But in this situation, we're going to render out a programming language component and we are going to add the props of language and developers, and we're going to assign that to the data item .language and .devs. So for every item in this programming languages array, we're going to map over it and return a programming language component and create a new list of these components and assign it to this language components constant. Now, one key thing, pun is definitely intended, to remember with creating lists in React is that the list is going to need a key property. So you need to add a key prop to your outermost element that you render within your map method. So if I had this programming language component wrapped in a div, let's say, I would want to add my key prop to this div because the div would be the outermost component. So you need to add a key prop to the outermost component. But here, I don't need to wrap it in anything. I can just add my key prop to my programming language component. Now, my programming language component, it can't access the key prop here. That is only for React. All right, so it's not actually going to pass this property as a prop here to the programming language component. So you need to pass a key prop to the outermost element that you return from your map method when trying to render out a list within React. And the reason you need to do this is because it basically allows React to know which item of that list is being changed or added or removed, and it allows React to be much more performant when it has the keys of these elements within the list. Now, these keys need to be unique, and since they need to be unique and they also need to be stable, meaning they shouldn't change, because of that, you shouldn't use an index. Like that should be your very last resort. So I really don't want to just, take my index in my map method and add that as my key. As if you add and remove elements from this list, then the indexes of those elements is going to change. So it's not going to be stable, and that's not going to allow React to know like when you add, change, remove an element, and allow React to be performant with that. So the key needs to be unique. Probably not the best idea to use an index. It should be a stable key throughout. Now, the keys need to be unique among siblings. So every component that I return here, it would need to have a unique key. So in this example, I use my language property of my data object. So for every programming language here, each language is different. So they're all going to have a unique key. So this object here is going to have the key of JavaScript, this one of Python, this one of Dart, so on and so forth. Now they need to be unique among siblings. They don't need to be unique among your entire application. They don't need to be globally unique. Like if you have multiple lists that you're rendering out throughout your app, not every single one of those lists needs to have unique keys across all lists. It just has to be within this single list here, within all of these sibling elements, they need to have unique keys. So you can just return an element from the map method into a new element here called language components. And then here, all I need to do is render out language components. And if we look at my browser here, you're going to see that I actually get a component for every different language. So this is my first component. The programming language is JavaScript. This is the current developers. And then you can see Python, Dart, Rust, Assembly, Java. And this gives me a new component for each item in my list here, because I map over this programming languages here and I just create a new component here and assign it to this language components and render that right here. Now, this is the first option you can take. You can also do a very similar thing, but just do it right within your JSX. So here I can take my programming language array and I can open up my curly braces here within my JSX and say, hey, this is JavaScript land. And then if I just paste this here and I map over my programming languages and I return a programming language for every iteration of my map method, and I don't even assign the return value to anything, this will actually still work. So if I look at my output of my program here and I'll refresh the page here so you know I'm not lying to you, you can see that I get this very same result. Because within React, if it sees that you map over an array and you return that directly in your JSX, it's going to return one of these components here that you return from your map method on each iteration of this map method. So it's going to create a brand new component for each piece of data within your overall array. So you can also just, within your JSX, open up a pair of curly braces and map over an array, and whatever you return there is going to be what's rendered to your web page. So when rendering out a list within your React applications, all you need to do is map over an array within your component, and then in your map method, you can return a new component for each item within your array or any JSX element. Just make sure that in that element, in the outermost element within your map method, that you add a key property to that method. And for that key property, just make sure that it is unique across the siblings of kind of your array that you're mapping over. And then you can either assign the return value of that map method to a different variable and just render out that variable within your JSX, or you can directly do your map method within your JSX, and whatever component you return from your map method, React will automatically know that that's what you want to render to the page, and it will render a single component for every iteration of your map method. So I hope you enjoyed this video, and I will see you in that next one.